Good evening or good afternoon, everybody. It's already evening here. Any one of you have been in the Netherlands before? I know some of you have not yet, but maybe those that I haven't met yet. Anyway, it's a very sunny day here, but we are approaching the evening. In a moment, things will get a little cooler. So today we have a topic that I think is quite interesting. And I know there's a lot of interest about this topic, and it's been quite consistent since about the 90s up until now. And that is the topic of NDEs. Now, let me just open the presentation. Well, before we continue on the topic of near-death experiences, may I share some of the findings from the Netherlands? And this may be relevant for America as well. This is a cardiologist that has been doing research for about NDEs for over 20 years. His name is Khemadhammo. And he became world famous because in 2001, he published a review of 344 studies in the renowned medical journal, The Lancet. And these studies were about NDEs, near-death experiences. So people who had experienced these near-death experiences, and they were talking about it, and then he tried to summarize his findings. This is actually much more widespread than many people think. There's been surveys done in the USA, in Australia, and Germany, and 4 to 15% of the population have had near-death experiences. Now, there may be many ways to get a near-death experience. Sometimes people have a near-death experience because they are revived through what is it called? Through electricity. Bzz, bzz. And sometimes they have there's a very serious condition, for example, a heart condition or another kind of condition, which causes people to slip out and back into life. And these kind of experiences cause NDEs to arise. But there's a lot of discussion about it, and it still continues to today. Not so long ago, actually, accidentally, by accident, a near-death experience was recorded with a brain scan. They intended to scan to keep track of a person's brain during some very serious surgery, but apparently that patient also had a near-death experience, and this was visible in the brain scan, so you could see that there was something going on. And so this made many headlines, and it shows just how little we still know about this in science. One could even ask the question whether it's something you can study by the scientific method, since it's kind of going outside of the material world. And as soon as you go outside of the material world, you are no longer covered by science, because you cannot see those things using your normal senses and normal devices. In many surveys done about near-death experiences by Khemadhammo and other researchers, for example, a researcher called Kenneth Ring has done a lot of research about NDEs as well. And they found out that there were several aspects of near-death experiences. And I have made a list here, and you can see that there is some similarity. There's actually a lot of similarity with the Buddhist view on near-death experiences. So there's also a Buddhist perspective on near-death experiences. So according to research done about near-death experiences, there is a lot of people experience a life review. What does that mean? Well, sometimes in English, you would say you see your life passing by. So when people have, for example, when they are almost passing away or passing out, they see their life flashing by. And this can be very intensive experiences. And it can also be like people experience a sort of universal laws. This is what people write, and the people writing this, they don't know anything about Buddhism or karma, okay? But they write about this sort of universal law that they feel that seems to apply to them and other people. That there is some sort of mechanism going on when they have these live reviews. In Buddhism, this live review is called Kamma Aramana and Kamma Nimitta Aramana. Now we're getting a bit technical here, but bear with me. The first one is the images of your actions. These are the things that you experience just before you pass away. And according to some Buddhist texts, even animals experience these images before they pass away. So this live review, you could say. So the Kamma Aramana is very universal. It is even said in one Buddhist text that if a goldsmith or some other kind of similar profession, if while they are hitting their anvil, they accidentally hit a fly, and the fly dies because of their being hit by the hammer, then they, in that very moment, they experience Kamma Aramana, a live review. So Buddhism even goes a little farther than what science says, in that Buddhism actually says that this is so universal that even animals experience it before they pass away. And it can be very fast and timeless, just like a fly that is hit by a hammer hitting an anvil. So this is known as Kamma Aramana. This is the images of your actions that you see just before you pass away. Then the second thing is the images of objects used during your actions. Kamma Nimitta Aramana. Kamma Nimitta Aramana can mean for example, you may have been a person who liked to bring food to the temple. Then you might have this very strong, powerful emotional connection to food and giving that to other people. Or you might have been a person who liked to help other people and do that in a certain setting, and you might remember that setting. So in the word object can also mean a building. It can mean very many things. So it's similar to Kamma Aramana, but it also includes our environment and all the things that we have been using. Now let's jump back to what Kenneth Ring and Khemadhammo say. They say, well, after you've had the live review, you experience a sense of happiness and peace and the sense of leaving your body behind. Now, you can imagine that many people who've had an NDE, they are older people. Not everybody, though, and I will talk about a few exceptions in a moment of children who have experienced NDEs. But most people tend to be a little older, so you can imagine that it's quite a relief to be released from your body that can be a bit painful and a bit damaged because of all the serious surgery and other conditions that you are under. So this is a sense of happiness and peace, and it's the sense of leaving your body behind. So many people, during this moment, many people experience an outer body experience. They see themselves lying down on the bed. And this is also described by many Buddhist teachers as being part of the dying process. Leaving your body behind is, of course, a bit controversial in scientific paradigms, because according to science, your brain is somehow producing this. That is what science says. So how can it be that you're outside of yourself, seeing yourself? So there's a bit of discussion about that, and some people have even tried to set up some sort of experiment that you could prove that that happened, but that's of course quite difficult. And maybe we are just not, we are trying a little bit, maybe we are making a mistake if we try to prove everything by science. Maybe there are certain domains which science shouldn't cross, or that religion shouldn't cross. So after that, what happens is that people tend to experience dark surroundings, like you're entering a cupboard or something and it's very dark. And they might also experience a tunnel of light, like a tunnel of light that is coming toward you or that you are entering. And then there will be a sense of entering another dimension. In Buddhism, these kind of experiences, like dark surroundings, a tunnel of light, or entering another dimension, they are known as Kati Nimitta Aramana. Kati Nimitta Aramana is the experience of the next world, the entering of the next world. You are not there yet, but you already see it in your mind. So when you are, for example, when you are, according to Buddhism, you can be reborn as a human being again. Now, some of you might believe that, some of you might not, but just suppose that that is true. Then according to Buddhism, then you might see, for example, the people in the family that you're about to be born in. Or you might have, if you are about to be reborn as an animal, which is also possible in Buddhism, then you might see that animal. So these are several examples. And you could also talk about other kinds of existences, very happy existences, which people in general describe as heaven, or very painful existences, which people in general tend to describe as hell. All of these existences are mentioned in the Buddhist text, but there has always been discussions, even in ancient times, about the truth in these matters and how it can be proven. Even in the Buddhist text, there are, for example, there's a story about a king who is very skeptical about the afterlife. And he tries to prove this in all sorts of ways, and he's very cruel about it. I mean, that he even does experiments on people. This is a very bad king, right? So he even does experiments on people to try and find out where they go after they die and so on. It's a very weird thing to read. And there is this monk who goes into a debate with this king to try to convince him. And this monk, he simply just raises many examples of why it's so difficult to try to prove the afterlife. But this is a very interesting text, because this was written over 2,000 years ago. It's well accepted among scholars that this is one of the older texts of Buddhism, and then it was written over 2,000 years ago. And some scholars even say that these old texts date back to the Buddha himself. So, but the Buddha isn't actually isn't hardly features in this text. It's a text between a meeting between a monk and a king. And then the monk, he tries to convince the king using his reasoning. And eventually the king, he does admit that he's very impressed by the monk. And although it isn't completely clear if he's completely convinced, he does feel that the monk is very wise, and he does go for refuge to this monk. But from this debate, we can see that even in the old days, in ancient India, there were people who, even though they didn't believe in science as many people do in the present day, that there were many people who believed in some forms of materialism. And you can even, if you want, you can even Google that, ancient Indian materialism. It is a saying. So there were people who didn't believe. There's some people that say that the Buddha must have believed in the afterlife or in rebirth, because that was just what every ancient Indian person believed. But that is not, that is making it too simple. In fact, the truth was much more complicated. In ancient India, many people did not have a clear understanding of the afterlife. They simply believed that there was some place where you would go and meet your ancestors, maybe similar to what Native Americans believe, which is not a very clear conception of the afterlife. And I know some of you have seen this presentation that I'm showing you now already, so maybe I'm just gonna give you a few more examples to make it more vivid. But there's a story in the Netherlands about the early days of Christianity, when one of the early saints of Christianity, who came over from either from England or from Ireland, and he tried to convert the Germanic tribes in the Netherlands. So this was a very long time ago, over maybe about 2,000 years ago. And there was no Christianity in the Netherlands yet. And so this saint came to the Germanic tribes, and he thought, I'm going to convert this chieftain, because if I convert this chieftain, then the whole tribe is just gonna be Christian, and then I have had some success. And then he was a very good orator, so he talked a lot about Jesus and all the good things, the Bible and so on. And eventually the chieftain was convinced, and he wanted to become a Christian, and everything was settled and everything was clear. And so he became a Christian. And just before he was about to do the ceremony to being baptized, the chieftain just asked the priest, hold on, if I become Christian, so that means I go to heaven, right? And then the priest said, yes, if you believe in Jesus, and if you are if you intend to follow him, and then you go to heaven. And then he said, well, does that mean that I won't be with my ancestors? Because you said that everybody who doesn't believe in Jesus, they will all go to hell. And then he said, well, yeah, that's true. Well, then I can't be a Christian. I'm sorry. And so the deal was off. He closed the tent, and it was off. So this story shows that sometimes people have different kind of conceptions of the afterlife. For him, the most important thing, and that was also the case for many ancient Indians, was not so much whether you go to heaven or hell, but simply to be with your ancestors. And that is, many cultures believed in that way. The whole idea of heaven and hell came afterwards. In fact, it seems to be that it came with the time of the Buddha. The Buddha started to talk about the afterlife in more visual ways, that there are different places you could go, and that there you can be born and reborn, also be born as a human back again. This was not something very ancient before the Buddha. In fact, there is even a passage in the Buddhist text where the Buddha confirms that he didn't copy this from anybody, that this was really something he saw for himself. But he also accepted that people needed time to investigate these matters, and that they might be doubtful about such things. And we'll get back to that in a moment. So you could say that when talking about NDEs and about rebirth in Buddhism, you could say that in general, Buddhism teaches that how we have lived is how we die. So if we've lived a life that is when we see our lives flashing by at the end of our lives, we feel we are happy with what we have done. Then we tend to go to a good place. But if we feel where we are very regretful about all the destructive things that we've done in our lives, then we might go to a poor place, to a not so good place. So how we have lived is how we die. Now I know that some people, when I say this, some people they become skeptical, or sometimes people get scared. But you have to understand that this comes in a lot of gradations. And in general, in Buddhism, compared to many other religions, we don't think that going to heaven is very difficult, or going to a good place, or even being reborn as a human being. It's not considered very difficult to do, but it is rare, though, because many people in the world do not think so much about spiritual and moral life. But it's actually not so difficult if you lead a positive life and you do a lot of good. It's not so difficult. But the most important thing in Buddhism is how you look at the present life. It's when you lead your life as you are now in a positive and good way, that is how you will pass away as well. How we have lived is how we die, and how we die is how we are reborn. One medical professional, doctor in America who did a lot of research about NDE, more like a personal kind of research. He once said that the whole idea of NDEs is we die the life we lived. And I think that's a very beautiful quote. We die the life we lived. And that's exactly what Buddhism teaches. So you might have heard of this passage in the Bible where they talk about the silver cord being broken, or the silver thread. I don't know the exact English word. You have to ask what some of you maybe have read the Bible sometimes. But the silver thread is also mentioned by some Buddhist teachers as well, although they don't talk about silver. But they do talk about a sort of thread that connects our body with some mental phenomenon. And so there is some connection in that sense, literally and also figuratively. So as I said, the way our mind works and how we feel and how we've lived our life is how we are going to be reborn according to Buddhism. But it depends also on the clarity of the mind. So it's said in Buddhist texts that when the mind is clouded, we tend to go to an unhappy destination. When it's clear, we go to a happy destination. There's also mentioning of a sort of intermediate world known as Yama. And this is partly clear, partly clouded. Yeah. So in Yama, there will be like a sort of moment where things are unclear yet. And some people go from Yama to a good place, other people from Yama to a bad place. It depends on many things. It might depend a little bit on mostly it depends on how they are aware of the good things that they have done, and how they can be joyful about that, and then how that goodness can feed them at that moment. This may get pretty abstract, so I'll just get more practical in a moment. In the Buddhist text in general, there are 5 destinations that are mentioned that people are reborn in. There is a hell that is mentioned, or there are several hells. But the word hell in Buddhism doesn't mean something eternal. Even hells, although these are places of suffering that people are reborn, but it's not forever. So people are born and reborn, and they continually move through these places. life as an animal, and this is something many people in the West struggle to accept, because in the West we tend to think of animals as something very different from human beings. But in Buddhism, it is possible that a person who used to be a human is born as an animal, and vice versa. You could compare this with electricity. And in the summer, when in Atlanta it gets very hot, you have to use a fan, right? Maybe you do, or maybe some air conditioning will be enough. I don't know. But suppose you have a fan, you switch it on. But when it is a little colder, sometimes maybe you need a heater. I don't know if that's a thing in Atlanta. I've never experienced any cold there yet. But suppose you have a cold night, and then maybe you have an electrical heater. Then you use that same socket. That same socket of electricity, in the winter, it gives you heat, and in the summer, it gives you air, it gives you cool. So this is electricity and how it works in different ways. In the same way, the human mind, it can be reborn as an animal. There's still a human mind within that animal body, but it's like it cannot work its way as a human mind can do in a human body. It's like you have very good software, like Windows 11. I think that's the latest version, or the latest version of the Apple software, but your computer is just very old. Maybe some of you can relate. So even though you have the best software, but it just can't run. In the same way, a human mind can be reborn in an animal's body, and vice versa. There's also talk about being born as a spirit or a beta. Being born as a human being in Buddhism, this is a thing. A human being can be reborn as a human being again. And then people can also be born as a deva, or what is sometimes known as heaven. And in Buddhism, there are many descriptions of these kind of places, but this is a short version. And in the Buddhist text, the Buddha is very clear that it's mostly just this, the mind that is the most important cause. So it's not so much to what religion you have registered yourself or what you believe in is part of it, but it's not. The most important reason is the clarity and the purity of the mind. So he illustrates this by a story. He says that if somebody would pour a...
Oh no, I'm just getting really good. Yeah.
He sunk.
He sunk.
to do all sorts of prayer for that. The oil would not sink. The oil would not sink.
Can you
And this, yes.
Can you go back what you just said because you froze?
Like right at the beginning of the slide.
All right. So as I just mentioned, it's the quality of the mind that is most important in determining our future, according to Buddhism, our future rebirth. So the Buddha actually has a story, and he talks about a few people standing at a lake of some kind, and there is some oil that is floating on the lake, and they want the oil to sink into the water, and they start to shout, "Please, oil, please sink, please sink." But the oil cannot sink because the oil and the water, they don't combine very well. So, and then there's another situation where somebody throws in some stones in the lake, and a lot of people then start to shout, "Please, stones, do not sink, do not sink." But even though they pray like that and they chant like that, they cannot prevent things from happening, which in modern terminology, we might consider laws of nature. In the same way, the Buddha says that when a person has a clouded mind, he will be reborn in a negative place. And even if you pray a lot or chant a lot, you cannot prevent that. But on the positive side is when the mind is pure and clear, even if you are not always living in easy circumstances, but if your mind is clear and pure and your heart is good, then you'll be born in a good place. So this is the nature. If it sings, it sings. If it floats, it floats. That's just the nature of things. And it doesn't have so much to do with what religion you belong to, but more with the universal laws of nature. Now, there are some Buddhist texts which say that it's good to think about the good qualities of the Buddha, for example. There are many devotional aspects to Buddhism. These are considered good to practice. But when it comes to the afterlife, the most fundamental thing is the mind and the heart. And it doesn't really matter so much whether you are, what religion you are subscribing to, but more what you practice. There are some stories of children who have had NDEs, and these are very interesting because children don't have the same sort of conditioning. So they have sometimes when they're very young, they haven't been to church yet, or they haven't been to any religious place of worship yet. So they haven't had the same conditioning. So their stories are very interesting. And there's been a doctor in America who's collected a lot of these stories. And some of these children, they had an NDE because of certain medical conditions. And sometimes it's an NDE of an animal. For example, in this kid, he briefly ended up in the body of a bee. So he saw a picture of him entering the body of a bee. He had this experience, but then he woke up again. And there have been many other kinds of experiences about nice places, about bad places, about intermediate places. That makes you want to question your ideas about what is going on when we pass into the next world. In Buddhism, we say that after death, some people are reborn immediately. I don't know if you can see this. This is pretty small, but I'll guide you through it. Some people are born immediately after death. Like if you have a very positive mind, then you are born in a happy destination. If you have a very negative mind, you are born in an unhappy destination. So it's the mood and the clarity of the mind, the quality of the mind, which is mostly what you have been doing throughout your life. So, and then after some people, many people also wander for a while. So they wander around for a while. Maybe you try to communicate with other people. Maybe you still need some time to accept your own death. But you can't communicate with anybody because you are already in another dimension. Then some people, they start to think about their good deeds, all those good things they've done. And this causes their mind and their character, it causes their whole being to flare up, to be positive and clear, and causes them to be reborn in a happy destination. Happy destination can be many things, okay? It can be what you might consider heaven, or it can be the human world is also considered a happy destination in Buddhism. So being born as a human being. Unhappy destination, some people, they start to think about all the bad things they have done while they are wandering around. And then they are born in an unhappy destination. This can also be born as an animal. It is also included. So it's very important that we learn to think about the good things that we have done. We do not need to hide them from ourselves. We do not need to brag about them, but it's good to be positive and to think about the good things that we have done. It will help us, not only morally, but also spiritually. But some people are just confused. They cannot accept their own death. They're just confused and wander around. They may not be very negative, nor very positive. Then we go to Yama. Yama is sort of an intermediate world. And these have been described also in the English-speaking world. Some people have been there and they come back to tell it. So this is where they eventually, after a long time, it can even be 100 days, then they eventually go to either a happy or an unhappy destination. This is the reason why in Thai tradition, the first 7 days after somebody has passed away is considered very essential to send all your good energy to that person after they passed away, the first 7 days. That's why in Thailand and in many other Buddhist countries, it is not common to have only 1 day of holding a funeral for somebody, but the funeral is held for several days. And in Thailand, this is even common for poor people. So even if you're very poor, the funeral will always be held in 7 days. If you are a rich person, maybe it's more extensive, but it will still be those 7 days. And then after 50 days and after 100 days, there will be a rememory, like a commemoration of that person who have passed away. I think this is a very beautiful tradition. You think about somebody for 7 days, you have a little bit of time. It doesn't have to be rushed like we do in the West. And then after 50 days and after 100 days, you can still commemorate that person. That is a very positive way. And we do commemorate that by sharing our good deeds and good energy with that person, because we believe that this may help them. And so this is some explanation. Now, when I talk about all of these things, I have to say that the Buddha did not never say that you have to believe these things in a forceful way. He didn't say you either have to believe it or not, and you have to, if you don't believe it, you maybe be in suffering or go to a bad destination or something. That is not exactly how the Buddha taught. There's a case where he went to the edge of a forest where many people lived who were known as the Kalamas. And the Kalamas, they had seen so many teachers with so many stories and so many beliefs and so many theories that they simply confessed to the Buddha that whatever he would be saying, it would probably have no effect at all, because they had literally heard everything. And then the Buddha said, okay, I understand you. It is fitting for you to be in doubt. Doubt has arisen in you about a perplexing matter. So he actually went along with them and said, yeah, this is okay, because the doubt, sometimes it's good to be doubtful about things which require your time, right? I mean, it's not always bad to be doubtful. Sometimes we can be doubtful about our anger, for example. If our anger is really good, that's a good form of doubt. Or if we are led by emotions in ways that are not constructive, then we are doubtful about that. Then that's a good form of doubt. And sometimes it's also good to be doubtful about those things that are not so obvious and that cannot be easily concluded. You cannot see them with your naked eye. Then the Buddha said you need to use your experience and investigate these matters and use your understanding of your life, and then also learn from wise people, but don't fix on superficial theories or superficial beliefs. If you never doubt, we might call that gullibility, right? You just say, okay, I believe you. I believe fully what you're saying. And then the next guy comes along and you say, oh, I believe you. I believe fully what you're saying. That's just gullible. That doesn't help. But then the opposite is that you doubt everything and always. You never commit to anything. That's stubborn, or maybe it's just not being able to commit. Then there's this nice middle way where you doubt things that are perplexing and you look for answers. This is the Buddhist way. You have a wise kind of doubt. And then once you have found enough experience, you have tried things out, you have maybe try to live your life in a certain way and see how things work. And then using that experience, you can draw certain conclusions. Even though we don't know everything, we can draw certain conclusions. You might even say that drawing these kind of conclusions is a form of faith, but it's a faith based on some experience. a reasonable kind of faith. And that's why faith in Buddhism has this kind of connection with wisdom and experience. The Buddha always mentioned them together, faith and wisdom. Faith is then universal quality, not just one belonging to one particular religion, but a universal quality of believing that our actions matter, the things we do matter, and that there is a path for human beings to grow and to be better and better. So when he continued, the Buddha continued to speak to the Kalamas, he said, well, even if you are not sure whether there is life after death, you will still, when you do something good, you will still go to heaven, right? Even if there isn't anything. If there is no karma, you're still happy in the present moment when you do something good. So doing good is always a good thing. Even if you're not sure whether there's a heaven or not, whether there's karma or not. You know, the Buddha believed in these things and he taught these things. He was he had very strong convictions about those matters. But here he was talking to the Kalamas, and the Kalamas, they had seen everything. They had heard about everything. So he simply said, well, in your case, just keep the benefit of the doubt and allow yourself to investigate these things. There isn't a life after death. Well, you still do good. You're still happy. You don't let yourself be led by greed or by hatred or by delusion. You use wisdom. You use generosity. You use kindness in your life. Those are the good motivations to build on. Then you are happy, even if there is no afterlife. And then he says, it's the same holds for evil. All the things that we do wrong, they make us suffer. So even if we're not sure whether evil will come back to the evildoer, you still are happy avoiding those things, right? I mean, who is really happy being angry at somebody? I never met anybody who's like, oh, I'm so happy to be angry with you. No, that's not a thing. So really anger or greed or delusion, these things don't really make us happy. So if you are observant, if you use your own experience, you can conclude these things for yourself. That's what the Buddha says. And many people have praised this text as being a sort of charter of free inquiry. And that's what it's been called for a long time now, this Kalama text. But the Buddha actually, he just gives people a way to a framework to think and to come eventually to faith and wisdom in a mindful way, in a considerate way, using your wisdom, using your thinking, using your observation and experience. Don't just believe in anything, but use your experience. And then when you learn from the wise people around you and you experience it for yourself, you try it out, then you can conclude. So today I've been talking about a lot of things that are quite out there. And so I would like also to give you this framework that comes along with it. So this is the last cartoon to lighten up the mood at the end of a serious matter. So this is a kid saying to his grandfather, yeah, well, I didn't believe in reincarnation when I was your age either. So to conclude for today, our good deeds always bring us happiness, whether there's a heaven or hell or not. Nevertheless, studying rebirth and the afterlife to really get to know it, to really think about those things and give it some place in your thought, give it some place in your life. It does give you a sort of meaning in life. It does give you a sort of other perspective in life. If you think of all your deeds, not just affecting your present life, but also the future to come, many lives to come, then that's very powerful and very beautiful as well. And then each of your actions and words and thoughts become important. And it's good to be cautious about it. And at the same time, be courageous to do good. So this is all I'd like to share with you today.